I think moving on to like there are many solutions possible when we talk about the organized sector.
Right.
However, our unorganized sector like India neither has a capital nor has the infrastructure to keep afloat for a particularly long time. Like barbers, street cart owners,
Right.
small shops, non-essential small services, these people do not come under the BPL category, below poverty line. Hence, they are also not eligible for direct benefit transfers from the government side. And there are fair chances that they would run out of their savings in couple of months or maybe 3 months, 4 months without work. With the stigma that comes along with COVID, people will be apprehensive in using the services of these unorganized sector workers for a long time. What can be done to sustain them through this pandemic?
Very good question, Sanat. I think this question is on policymakers' mind
Yes.
quite prominently, and I think both the media and policy circles are attending to this question. So let's look at it this way. So this vulnerability, I think, is quite pronounced, and just to get a grasp of the problem, we know that globally, and I'll come to some statistics for India, but globally, from about 2 billion workers who are employed in the informal sector, the unorganized sector, it is estimated that in excess of 1.5 billion of them are facing risk of loss of income and livelihood. So the problem is quite big globally. And I think the problem is of similar magnitude in India as well. We know that more than 80% of workers in India are, I think the estimates are closer to 85%.
Yes.
Are in the unorganized sector.
Yes.
And naturally, because the unorganized sector does not have access to formal ways of credit, access to government services, which I think in the time of pandemic is even more important, they are unable to be protected by the safety nets that may be provided for during a pandemic. So that's the nature of the problem and the magnitude of the problem. Let us try and unpack the vulnerabilities, right? So the unorganized sector is characterized by MSMEs mostly.
It's mostly.
Right? Mostly. And they have a few workers. Sometimes there are just one or two people who are providing a certain type of service. This also means that except the wage bill, that satisfying a wage bill, there's not much cash reserve in those systems, in those businesses. And in times of a pandemic, the vulnerabilities kind of become apparent because there is no fallback. And without a support, without some means of support from the government, the issues are quite serious. But there are certain possibilities to have, right? And before we get to the possibilities, let me offer a perspective on this, how important this issue is. So informal businesses, the choice that they are faced with is quite contrasting. On one hand, there is livelihood, which they gain from their from MSME operations, and on the other hand, it is safety. So for any lockdown or movement restriction to be effective de facto, it is important that 80% of workers in India are incentivized to stay indoors or restrict their movement. And the only way to do that is to ensure a substitute for the livelihood, which even if they were out on the streets and selling their goods is not assured because of declined consumer demand. But there are certain things that can be done, right? So the policy prescriptions on that. Similar to MSMEs in the formal sector, I think one-time grants conditional on formalization requirements would be an excellent policy suggestion to the extent that it can be carried out. It would have a double benefit. It would extend the safety net to the unorganized sector, at the same time, bring them into the fold of formal sector so that they are observable to the system. That's one. The other thing is access to credit has been an issue, and I think that becomes a profound issue for MSMEs. The way access to credit works is you need credible borrowers, and credibility is signaled through certain documents, business operations, and continuity in the past.
Indeed.
So there are substitutes for that. For example, informals also work with suppliers, and they do have supplier invoices because that's a proof of business operations. So rather than waiting for them to formalize, those supplier invoices and legitimate proof of business operations could be leveraged to qualify them for credit. So I think these are some innovative ways of looking at this. But of course, the long-term goal becomes transitioning to the extent possible from informality to formality. And if you'll entertain me, there's some recent research which I've been participating in which we have explored the incentives for formalization. And what recent research uncovers is that it is all about the incentives to go underground. Informal businesses choose to go underground because of certain weaknesses in the legal and regulatory environment, because contract enforcement is not as effective. Legal recourse to business wrongdoing is not strong and protection is not adequate, that they choose to go underground, that is informal. One-off reforms have limited utility. And I think what is required is an upgrade to the legal and regulatory system in which small businesses operate. And I think that will see, hopefully, based evidence suggests, that should see an uptick in rates of formalization and hopefully survival in the long run.
Yes, that's perfect, sir, because that's a perfect suggestion for the policymakers, because at Thinking Tree, we are looking for a solution, and I appreciate that that's a perfect solution to formalize the unorganized sector. And that's a great move, great suggestion, sir.